Hi everyone, excited to be a part of this event, which is very aptly named Winter Olympics. Today I'm going to be talking about how we can bring product led growth mindset to product marketing and some of its traditional approaches. Before I dive into my session, let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Srikant. I head product marketing at Insider. Insider is a cross channel marketing platform that enables enterprise marketers from companies like Singapore Airlines, Gap, Estee Lauder, and many more to personalize and deliver messages and experiences across channels. I've had a background in product management and I've always tried to bring some of the product thinking into product marketing approaches. And I think today, what we're going to discuss are a lot of ideas that I have personally experimented on along with my team, and I've seen some really good results. So, without any further ado, let's jump right into the session. So first things first, if by any chance you haven't heard of product-led growth, which I think is highly unlikely, here is a good refresher. So product-led growth is a business methodology in which user acquisition, expansion, conversion, and retention are all driven primarily by the product itself. And I think this is key that product itself is the driver of everything that you can think of from acquisition all the way until retention. And to contrast it, obviously, there are companies with sales led models or marketing led growth models. And it's not necessary when you think of this as completely independent of each other. There's a good chance that these models could coexist with each other. So, really treat this more as a strategy and methodology. And let's see how we can apply it to our product marketing approaches. So, even before we get to that question of how we apply it, I think it's very important to understand firstly who are successful at product led growth models, and secondly why are they successful, what's working for them, right? So let's look at who are racing the PLG game. If you think about it, there are companies like Airtable, Slack, Zoom, Notion, Calendly, Dropbox. All of these are my personal favorites, so that's why they find a mention here. But there are definitely hundreds more, if not thousands, of companies who are actually doing PLG and succeeding at that. And that brings us to the second part of the question, which is what does it take for PLG to work? And I think taking a closer look at how the user workflow looks like on these platforms can give us a good sense of what does it take for PLG to work. So a quick example here, let's say if you were to consider Calendly, ideally you would integrate Calendly with your Gmail or Google Calendar. You get a link that you can send an email or share it otherwise, and then you start booking meetings, right? So that's a simple workflow for Calendly. If you take another example of, say, Slack, it would be you create a channel, invite your teammates, and then you start communicating with those teammates. And if you consider Notion, for example, it would be something like maybe creating a doc or a space that could be a good mini use case. You share it with your team and you start collaborating. Now, if you look at all of these workflows or examples, you will see two key things. First is experience. Now, this is usually owned by the end user and not by a decision maker or a buyer. And this is pretty critical for PLG to function well, that it's largely driven by the end user and it's slightly bottom up when compared to top down approaches for a sales led or some of the marketing led approaches. And on the other hand, the value pillar is pretty important because this is the perceived benefit as recognized by the user. And when you consider all of the workflows that we were looking at, and so benefits were from, say, collaboration to better communication to maybe booking meetings. And all of these are goals that the user wants to achieve with these projects. And the key part that you will see when you look at value is for PLG to work really well, the time to realize value is usually short or at best instantaneous as well. So, really, both of these things, having that experience which is driven by the end user and having a value or rather a short time to realize that value are pretty critical for PLG to work. So, now having known what works in PLG, let's also sort of contrast this and see what sort of companies are not able to leverage PLG. And I think my best guess here would be either they have complex products with no self-serve experience, barriers in terms of integration, IT dependency, or even say dependency on any other teams. And then I think lastly, which is also quite critical, is the time to realize value itself is fairly long. And these three reasons can pretty much deter any sort of company from taking up this PLG approach as like a very primary sort of an approach for their entire growth model. So now I think it brings us to that question of what do PMMs do instead at these companies, right? And you might have guessed it, lots of decks and collaterals. So don't get me wrong here. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with working on a lot of decks and collaterals. In fact, we have a very healthy part of our business is very primarily sales led, and we work with our sales team. Sales enablement goals such as all of these decks and collaterals are a big part of product marketing teams, and I do see them being a big part regardless of what sort of model that you're working on. But we're trying to break that sort of thinking that you can't go beyond this in traditional product marketing to really leverage some of these PLG models. And that's what I'm trying to talk about in this session today, and give you some concrete examples of how this could be changed. So brings back to the question, does it really mean they cannot do PLG? Of course not. That's not the case, and that's what we are here to talk about. So let me take you through the second part of the session, where we're primarily going to talk about what does bringing PLG mindset to product marketing mean. And I think I'm trying to establish a framework here which is sort of proven not just by teams that I've worked with, but also a lot of teams out there who have a mix of sales-led, marketing-led, and product-led sort of mindsets fusing into one very cohesive approach. So let's look at what does it take to bring that PLG mindset. And I could come up with five concrete things that I see is working for a lot of players out there, including us. First is surfacing mini use cases. I'll obviously talk about this much more in detail with some examples, but just to give you an overview, what I mean here is sometimes your products are complex. Obviously, you can't expose them for a completely self-serve experience, but are you able to figure out some mini use cases or smaller chunks of your product that could be exposed to your users? I think that's going to be a pretty big win to sort of make this mind shift change. And then the second is leveraging marketplaces. We all know in B2B personas, there's almost a marketplace for every single sort of persona that you can think of. There are a lot of established companies who've built some very mature integration marketplaces where you can ride on their success as well. The third, which is coming more from a product management world, where dog fooding, which is essentially to use your own products, is a very popular sort of a methodology. But how could you extend that into product marketing to leverage and showcase your product? And then fourth one, which I think is slightly my personal favorite nowadays in terms of do-it-yourself product demos. Can you give your customers to explore and tailor their own demos rather than you giving them a fixed set of videos or tutorials sort of thing? And then finally, experiential free tools are expanding the scope of traditional marketing collaterals to sort of give your customers a very close proxy to how it would feel if they were really using your product and trying to get value out of your product out of your product. So let's jump into what this means. But before that, just a quick sort of heads up here. Obviously, not everything can be completely owned by product marketers and executed by product marketers. In especially the first two, surfacing mini use cases and to an extent of leveraging marketplaces, you obviously have your product managers and your larger engineering team getting involved. But the way I see it is product marketers need to own all of these things. And they need to be the people who generate these ideas, who identify and narrow in on the opportunities that you should focus on, but then obviously orchestrate and like focus and bring in all of your resources from product managers to engineers to marketing to sales to really drive this to conclusion. So let's start stepping into each of these. The first one would be surfacing mini use cases, and a very good example of this is what we did at VW. This was my previous company where it's a A/B testing platform competing with the likes of say an Optimizely or Google Optimize. And one of the challenges that you would see with some of the personalization tools in certain scenarios is that there is a slight barrier in terms of IT getting your code up on the website and then you being able to run experiments. So that's when we started thinking that is there a way for us to zoom out of this current experimentation and then like start looking at the entire experimentation workflow of users and see are there some points or use cases that we can expose very conveniently. And this is what you're right now seeing on the screen, where what we did is we built a Chrome extension, which was essentially a very easy way for anyone on your team to come in and start logging in some of the feedbacks, ideas from websites. For example, in this case, just say from on Zalora, I see this pop up and I say, hey, is there a way for us to optimize this pop up so that we just select one of the options based on either men's category or women's category? And what happens is this observation gets logged with all of its state, sits in our platform, and all of this is done even without, say, the customer actually logging into your product. So this is a great way of removing some of the barriers and exposing some of your use cases and give your prospects or customers a very strong feeling of what would their life be like if they were to use your product to full potential. I'm sure there are a lot of different use cases for different sorts of industries where they've really broken down their products and like exposed it in different ways. This brings us to the second topic, which is how to leverage marketplaces. Now, like I said, for B2B, if you were to think of marketplaces, if you're looking to target e-commerce marketers or product managers, this Shopify's app marketplace. If you're looking at sales and marketing and customer service sort of personas, then you have Salesforce App Exchange, which pretty much covers, I would say, 50-60% of your B2B teams. There is obviously collaboration marketplaces like Monday.com, which could be pretty horizontal, cutting across different sorts of teams. And if you're looking at developers specifically, there could be AWS marketplace. But essentially, the goal of highlighting all of this is that is there a way for PMMs to identify marketplaces that really fit well with your target segment? And then again, work with your product management to expose those use cases so that one, you create like this entire angle of self-serve experience that we were talking about earlier. But more importantly, is there a way that you can think of removing some of the barriers? For example, in our case at Insider, integration can be a barrier for some of the marketers. So what we did is started building apps with, say, on the Shopify marketplace or Magento marketplace or BigCommerce marketplace. And essentially, if you're a Shopify merchant, it's as good as like just making a couple of clicks and then installing our app. And that's a way for us to almost reduce that barrier and like give a very instantaneous way of delivering that value for these customers. So that's really a very good way, effective way. Obviously, again, slightly high effort, but high value if you're able to convert it well and like start promoting it to your audience base. So that brings us to the third topic. And I think this is, like I said, something that's more inspired from product management as a practice where managers are always dog fooding their own products, using it before they give it to even their alpha beta customers. And what you can do as a product marketer is wherever obviously it applies is if you can use your own products to showcase a certain use case on your own say website or any other property that you're looking at. So in this case, Drift, using Drift, great example of how a chatbot would feel, what sort of use cases would come up, how seamless or smooth is that experience, right? But this is an easy example. You could always argue that Drift as a product is also pretty easy to use. Another example, which is more inspired from our product at Insider, is we built this product called In Story, or it's essentially a way for you to build story like experiences on your website. So Instagram, Netflix like stories, you could actually build it on your own website, maybe an e-commerce website or a media publisher website. Now what we did was to take this product and treat ourselves as let's say a publisher, and we took it to our blog. We started imbibing all of our use cases, and we made like a very good story based experience of how you would experience some of our latest ebooks, blogs, etc. And this was a great way of showcasing our customers the power of InStory, which is our product, and also helping them understand or visualize rather how would this look like if I were to use it either on my blog or use it either on my e-commerce store to promote some of the products. So that's really another way of like leveraging your products where it can. Obviously this doesn't apply to every single product that's out there, but a lot of products do have the ability to dog food their own products and showcase them as well. So this brings us to the fourth topic, which is do-it-yourself product demos. I'm sure there are better ways to call this, but I prefer calling them a do-it-yourself demo, because there's one kind of demo where your sales teams are demoing to your customers, or your marketing team has built certain video demos, and there's little to no control of customers on this experience. They don't feel in control or in charge. And I think that's the reason why I've started seeing these do-it-yourself product demos becoming pretty popular. Pendo by far, I think, is one of my favorite examples. You can see what they've done is they've really broken it down into a lot of mini use cases, and you can pick from one of those mini use cases. You get to also interact as you go along in the demo. You can, for example, add a widget, see how you can configure that widget, and also see the end results in terms of a dashboard. And if you were to contrast this with the usual world, which would be get Pendo install integrated with either my app or web app, send some events, let the data flow in, and then visualize that data. It's a longer cycle in terms of how you would visualize that. So this is a great way of doing it. And the good news actually is that it's not that tough to do it. I've seen a lot of really good tools come up in the market. I've heard of Walnut, DemoStack, Reprise. I think quite a few tools who have been helping SaaS vendors, specifically focus for SaaS, in terms of how you can create this interactive sandboxes where it's a controlled experience, but the user or the customer or the prospect also gets a sense of control because they are in charge of how the demo progresses from point A to point B. And this is a great way of showing complex products, showing products which require a lot of data, showing products which could have a longer time to value in terms of their realization. And this, I think, brings us to the last topic, which is using experiential free tools, as I would like to call it. I think we've seen a lot of free tools in the market being used by a lot of different marketing teams, from say some sort of an estimator to a free calculator to an ROI calculator, sort of things, right? And all of these, what they do is they do help customers understand some level of like what's the perceived benefit if I were to take this product and use this product. But what I'm trying to get to is not necessarily tools which are something like an ROI calculator, or a tool that simulates only some part of the value. But I'm focusing more on tools that can actually be the closest proxy to how your product would feel like if someone was to experience your product. So a good way to understand this is an example here that I have from Litmus, which is an email marketing software. I think the background here is that Gmail at one point of time launched a a very good feature which helps you make your promotional emails stand out in the promotions tab. And what they do is they help you put some badges like your own product logo. You can put some discount codes. You can put some offerings, etc. And then you can also bring out a good image in terms of how this email is going to look like it's more like a preview of what's there in the email. But one part to this problem was it still required a developer to get that code, configure it for your setup, and then like integrate it into your email vendor. But what Litmus did and what a few other vendors did as well is to, in this case, what you're seeing is give you a tool that you can use to actually configure and see how this message would look like for your actual email campaign. And at the end of the day, just click on that get code button and then send it to your developers who can integrate it. So you can see how they've surfaced a very good mini use case to build something which you could potentially use as a marketer without again any sort of barriers from your developers or anywhere else. So that's a great example of taking a mini use case but providing an experience which is very close to the product itself. Another good example is actually from our own setup, where a good part of our product is what we call as a customer data platform, which is usually used by marketing teams to pull in a lot of data from, say, your analytics setup, from your CRM, from your offline stores, whatever it could be. And then you use that data to better target your end customers. And as you can imagine, combining data at this level, trying to leverage it for personalization, messaging, etc., is fairly complex, and it can take multi-week, multi-month sort of a project to actually realize that value. So what we instead did was for us to build a free tool which our customers could come in and visualize by, say, selecting the data sources from what they're looking at combining. Say I select something like analytics and customer service. So then it starts telling me that, hey, these are the use cases that you can do as a marketer. You can click through, explore these use cases, but we're getting them to a point where they can realize what sort of value can I get from doing all of this integrations and doing buying a customer data platform, which could cost me like tens and thousands of dollars. So that's really another example, and I'm sure there are so many other examples that I cannot cover in this one session. But if you start looking at a lot of brands who have fairly complex products, there are pretty good ways that they're exposing their product and some of the use cases, so that it becomes pretty clear for marketers or marketers is the wrong person. It's probably not the persona for everyone. It's the persona for us, but it really makes it easy for your target persona to understand the value that your product would be bringing in. And a lot of these tools, by the way, are things that can be built very easily with some of the tools like, say, Airtable. In fact, what you're seeing right now is what we built on Airtable, and it's a pretty easy sort of no code sort of a way to build it. It's cost effective, but it's also completely controlled by product marketing teams in terms of the experience. So that brings us to the end of the session. And to wrap up, I think I just feel it's a very slight change in mindset, but I feel every PMM can leverage PLG thinking, think slightly out of the box to see how you can create these experiences in traditional marketing and that are very close to this sort of PLG experience. Obviously, you will have to collaborate with your product teams for creating very high effort, high value PLG strategies. But on the other hand, you really need to focus as product marketers, take charge and like break it down into use cases that are achievable, that are some things that you can expose to your audience in a very self-serve and short time to value. Like, remember, like, self-serve experience and short time to value are the two most important things for your product-led initiatives to really work out. So that's what we had to cover in the session. Hope you guys had a good amount of insights from this session. Thank you.